A school bus vanished on a snowy mountain road in 1980. Then, in 2024, a hiker found it frozen solid, windows boarded from the inside. What happens next will leave you speechless. You must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who seek the truth behind forgotten tragedies will do it before this story begins. The winter sky was heavy and gray, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and whispered warnings through every gust. The school bus rumbled steadily along Route 9B, its faded yellow paint dulled by years of wear and winter grime. Inside, 23 boys sat clustered in rows, their chatter muted by the chill that crept in through the cracked windows. They wore layered coats and scarves, faces flushed from the day's outing to the Renshaw Mine Museum. But their excitement was fading as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched long over North Kellen Ridge. Mr. Dunley, the driver, gripped the steering wheel with calloused hands, his breath misting the cracked glass as he squinted through the gathering dusk. The old man's breathing was heavy, labored, as if the cold air bit deeper than usual, making each inhale a struggle. His eyes flicked toward the rearview mirror, where boys fidgeted with their coats and backpacks, some whispering nervous jokes about the snow forecasted for the night. Dunley's jaw tightened. He was a quiet man, not given to complaints or stories, but tonight, a tight knot of unease twisted in his gut. Near Weaver's Bend, the bus passed a gas station, its neon sign flickering against the darkening sky. The clerk, a man named Harris, wiped his hands on a rag as he stepped outside, watching the bus trudge up the ridge. He caught sight of the yellow vehicle ignoring the freshly posted signs. Warning, snowstorm approaching. They read, their letters bold and urgent. Harris called out after the bus, his voice cracking in the cold air. "Hey, you sure you want to go up that way? The weather's turning bad." But the bus didn't slow. The engine hummed steady, the wheels crunching against the gravel as it climbed higher, deeper into the shadowed mountains. Inside, a boy named Benny Langford pressed his forehead against the frosted window, eyes tracing the bare branches of skeletal trees swaying in the biting wind. He pulled his scarf tighter, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the first flurries drift down. Beside him, Davin Crick shifted restlessly, muttering under his breath, "Storm's gonna catch us if we don't hurry." Benny's voice was soft but steady, a quiet determination beneath his pale exterior. "We'll be fine," he said, more to himself than to Davin. "We always are." But even Benny's words couldn't quiet the chill creeping through the bus. The chatter faded as the boys noticed the weather closing in. Dark clouds rolled over the peaks, swallowing the last light. The road narrowed, slick with ice, and the bus swayed slightly with the uneven pavement. Dunley's knuckles whitened on the wheel. He muttered a prayer under his breath, a habit from years past that offered little comfort now. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, catching the anxious faces of the boys. Suddenly, a sharp gust slammed against the bus, rattling the windows and sending a shiver through the passengers. A voice piped up from the back. "Did you guys hear that?" The boys hushed, listening. Outside, the wind howled, wrapping the bus in a cloak of cold menace. Dunley glanced toward the dashboard clock. 5:43 p.m. Night would fall soon, faster than any of them expected. "Keep your seats," Dunley said, his voice low but firm. "We're almost through the pass." His words were meant to reassure, but the tremor in his throat betrayed his worry. As the bus crept forward, the snow began to fall harder, thick flakes swirling against the headlights, turning the world outside into a blur of white. The road signs passed by in flashes, warning curves, narrow paths, sudden drops, but the bus stayed on course, undeterred. Inside, the boys grew quieter, the usual youthful energy dampened by the pressing cold and the creeping silence that seemed to fill the bus. Near a sharp bend, the bus shuddered as its tires slipped briefly on ice. A collective breath was held, followed by nervous laughter, but Dunley didn't smile. He gripped the wheel tighter, whispering, "Just a little further." His eyes searched the darkness, trying to pierce the swirling storm, to find the end of the mountain road. Then the world outside changed. The wind intensified into a furious howl, slamming against the bus with relentless force. The headlights flickered. The radio, crackling faintly, burst into static and then silence. Inside, the temperature seemed to drop further, breaths turning to frost. The boys looked at one another, fear slowly unraveling the thin threads of calm. At Weaver's Bend, Harris stared at the empty road, the snow already masking the tracks. He frowned and called his wife, voice tight. The bus didn't come past. It's like it vanished. His words hung in the icy air. The night swallowed the mountain pass whole. By morning, the bus was gone. Search teams combed the mountain for weeks, but no trace was ever found. The town of Langston buried the loss under rumors, prayers, and silence. Families moved away. Teachers stopped talking about the field trip. The story faded until 2024, when 34-year-old hiker Colin Brent stumbled upon something near the tip of Frostvale Spur. Beneath a sheet of packed snow and ice, he saw a curved shape, metal, rusted yellow, and unmistakably a bus. The windows were frosted over, but what made his blood freeze wasn't the vehicle itself. Every single window had been boarded shut from the inside, and the snow preserved everything, down to the names etched on the seats. The early morning sun cast a pale, icy light over the clearing where the bus now rested, encased in a vast transparent dome that hummed softly with the sound of climate control. The vehicle was suspended in time, preserved like a relic from a forgotten age. Despite the decades buried beneath snow and frost, the bus's yellow paint clung stubbornly to its rusted frame, flecked with chips and streaks where ice had worn away the surface. The air inside the dome was crisp, sterile, almost antiseptic, far removed from the biting cold that had gripped North Kellen Ridge for so long. Ellis Carr adjusted the thick gloves on his hands and stepped cautiously onto the narrow walkway leading into the bus's open door. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air, mixing with the faint metallic scent of aged steel and the dry, musty odor of decayed fabric. As the lead forensic technician, Ellis knew this was unlike any other case he had worked. This bus was more than just a vehicle. It was a sealed capsule of mystery, frozen in time with secrets trapped inside its walls. His boots crunched softly against the bus floor as he crossed the threshold, the sound muted by the decades of dust and ice beneath. The cloth seats were intact, faded but still bearing the faint outlines of where bodies once sat. He ran his gloved fingers over the worn armrest beside him, noticing the etchings carved deep into the fabric, a jumble of initials, dates, and childish drawings. There were names, Benny, Davin, Roland, scratched hurriedly, some accompanied by small hearts or crossed-out words. Ellis knelt down to examine the ceiling and paused. Long, jagged scratches marked the metal above him, as if someone had clawed desperately for air or escape. The irregularity of the lines sent a chill down his spine. What the hell were they trying to tell us? Ellis murmured to himself, voice echoing faintly in the confined space. His eyes moved to the windows. Unlike any bus he'd seen, none of the glass panes were cracked or broken. Instead, thick, roughly hewn wooden planks were nailed, or rather wedged, into place from the inside, blocking out the outside world completely. Some of the planks looked hastily ripped from the bus's own floorboards, splintered but still jagged where it had been torn free. Ellis frowned. Who sealed this from the inside? And why? He pulled out a small flashlight and trained it against the planks, revealing faint marks of what could have been primitive fastening attempts. It was a prison, but one self-imposed. A terrifying thought crept into his mind. Were these children willingly locking themselves away? A soft beep from his handheld scanner interrupted the silence. Ellis turned to see the thermal imaging results displayed on his tablet. The device highlighted faint, irregular heat signatures trapped beneath the floorboards, too scattered to be machinery, too faint to be any living thing. The frozen ice that had seeped through the buses seems complicated the readings, masking whatever lay beneath. Damn it, he muttered, squinting at the screen. We're not even sure what's down there yet. Outside, the murmur of the gathered Langston officials drifted through the open dome vents. Ellis knew the community was watching this investigation like a hawk, desperate for answers they weren't ready to face. Across the clearing stood Roland Tim, his face etched with lines of worry and decades of regret. The man's shoulders were slightly hunched, and his gaze never left the bus. When Ellis approached, Roland's voice was low, trembling but steady. "I was supposed to be on that bus," he confessed, eyes dark with guilt. "I pretended to be sick that morning. I thought I was lucky. I thought I'd escaped a tragedy." Ellis studied him carefully. "And now?" Roland shook his head slowly. "No, I don't think I dodged a tragedy. I think I escaped something far worse." Roland Tim's fingers trembled as they hovered above the worn wooden seatbacks, his gaze fixed on the faded carvings. The bitter chill of the sealed dome wrapped around him, making each breath visible in quick puffs. "Benny plus Davin equals dead or alive." The scratched message stared back, raw and unsettling. He swallowed hard, his throat tightening with an ache that had nothing to do with the cold. The names were more than just words. They were memories clawing their way back from a past he'd tried to bury. The lead investigator, Ellis Carr, stood a few feet away, clipboard in hand, watching Roland with a cautious intensity. "Can you tell me more about Benny and Davin?" Ellis's voice was steady but carried the weight of urgency, as if each second wasted might let the past slip further into oblivion. Roland nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the seat. "Benny Langford was different," he began, voice cracking with the residue of old guilt. "Quiet, pale kid. Spoke in whispers like he was always scared to be overheard. But there was something else too, this strange strength." His hand brushed over a cluster of scratches that looked like initials tangled with tally marks. "He was obsessed with survival games. I remember once he locked himself in a locker just to see how long he could last without air." Ellis leaned in, scribbling notes, but Roland's eyes drifted to the seat across. "Then there was Davin Crick. Loud, reckless, the kind of kid who pushed every boundary. He was the opposite of Benny, but somehow they clicked, like two sides of the same coin. They called themselves partners in crime. Troublemakers, but loyal." A thin line of frost traced the windowpane behind Ellis as the chill seeped through the glass. Roland's breath hitched, and he swallowed again, the weight of the memory pressing down. "In the weeks before the trip, Benny told me something. Said, 'You'll see how strong kids can be when grown-ups fail.' Back then, I thought it was just some weird statement. Kids say weird things, right? But now," he trailed off, voice low and trembling, "now it feels like a warning." The investigators exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no time for comfort. Ellis motioned to a team of technicians gathered near the emergency exit at the rear of the bus, their faces grim beneath knitted brows. Roland followed their gaze. The floor panels had been carefully pried up, revealing an intricate web beneath. Metal rods, sharpened to cruel points, spiraled outward in a deliberate pattern, encasing the emergency door like an iron cage. Ellis's voice dropped to a whisper that barely cut through the heavy air. "This isn't an accident. Look at the detail, the precision. Someone put serious thought into this." Roland swallowed hard, the hairs on his neck standing on end. "It's a trap," he said, voice hollow. "Or maybe a barrier." The team moved cautiously around the perimeter, their footsteps muffled on the frozen ground. The rods gleamed faintly under the harsh lights, their tips cruel and threatening. The smell of cold metal mixed with the faint odor of damp wood and something else, a musty scent that teased the edges of Roland's memory, something like old earth after rain. "How long do you think it took to make this?" Ellis asked, crouching beside the spiral. He ran a gloved hand along one of the rods, careful not to disturb the fragile setup. Roland's gaze drifted to the bus seats again, eyes catching another cluster of carvings. A name circled repeatedly, others crossed out hastily. "It wasn't done in a rush," he said quietly, voice barely audible. "They planned this. They worked together." Ellis nodded slowly, brows furrowed deep in thought. "This wasn't panic," he muttered, eyes darkening with the weight of realization. "This was preparation." The old tape recorder was wedged tightly behind the driver's seat, hidden just out of immediate sight beneath a tangle of rusted wires and dust-coated insulation. Ellis Carr crouched low, the stale, cold air of the bus thick around him, and carefully pried it free. The metal was brittle with age, but the device's innards seemed miraculously intact. He held it gingerly, aware that this fragile artifact might be the key to unlocking the terrible silence that had haunted the bus for over 4 decades. The dim light of the dome flickered overhead, casting elongated shadows on the bus's faded yellow walls. As Ellis handed the recorder to one of the forensic technicians, whose fingers trembled slightly as he prepared the ancient tape for playback. The first moments of sound were fractured, hissing static, faint crackles, the distant creak of the bus settling. But then a voice emerged. It was thin, breathless, a young boy's whisper barely audible over the tape's degradation. "We're sealing it now," the voice said urgently. The words rushed and clipped. Ellis leaned closer, heart pounding, as the boy continued. "Dunley's not moving. I think he drank the last juice." The tape's faint background noise suggested hurried movements, the scrape of wood against metal. "He kept yelling about them coming," the voice whispered, a tremor creeping into its tone. "Davin's on lookout." Then there was a rustling sound, like hurried footsteps or a shifting bundle, before silence swallowed the recording entirely. Ellis's skin prickled. The tension in the cramped bus was almost tangible, as if the walls themselves held their breath. The idea that this fragment of a voice belonged to Benny, the quiet, pale boy who had vanished with the others, made the moment unbearable. Questions clawed at Ellis's mind. Who were they? What were the boys trying to keep out or in? Not far from Ellis, Cal Hensley, the cryptologist Ellis had brought in to decode the notebooks found scattered beneath seat cushions and jammed between cracks, sat cross-legged on the floor, sifting through pages filled with tangled symbols and coded scribbles. Cal's brow furrowed deeply, eyes sharp behind thick-rimmed glasses. The smell of old paper mixed with the cold, sterile air as he muttered to himself, his voice low but intense. "I've cracked one of the sequences," Cal announced suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. "It's not random gibberish. It's a countdown." Ellis looked up sharply. Cal's fingers traced a series of numbers carefully inked across a page. 7 days, counting down. But then, he pointed to a place halfway through where the countdown inexplicably reset to 7 again. "Look here," Cal said, voice laced with disbelief. "The countdown restarts halfway through. It's like something changed in the plan, or someone did." Ellis swallowed hard, the weight of this revelation pressing on him. A ritual, perhaps, or a desperate measure. 7 days of what? 7 days of waiting? 7 days of containment? The mystery deepened. Nearby, Roland Tim, the man who had narrowly escaped the ill-fated trip all those years ago, stood silently watching the investigation unfold. His eyes, usually guarded, now flickered with a shadow of unease. The sight of the emergency exit had drawn him like a magnet. The investigators had recently discovered that it was welded shut, clumsily but deliberately. The metal was uneven, scarred, with jagged edges betraying a rushed effort. The boys had clearly used tools, likely stolen from the very mine museum they had visited before boarding. Roland's voice cut through the low hum of discussion, steady but chilling. What if they didn't board themselves in to hide from something outside? He paused, swallowing hard as he locked eyes with Ellis and the others. What if it was to trap something? Inside, Ellis lay awake in his small motel room, the thin walls barely holding back the cold December wind that scraped against the windowpane. The question Roland had asked kept echoing relentlessly in his mind. What if the boys hadn't boarded the bus to hide from something outside, but to trap something inside? The thought gnawed at him with a relentless hunger, stirring a chill deeper than the winter air. Unable to find rest, Ellis dressed quickly and headed back to the state's secure facility. The bus sat encased in its frozen dome, an eerie monument against the sterile white glow of overhead lights. The hum of machines and the faint crackle of ice shifting beneath the bus made the air feel charged, alive. His breath came out in small, visible puffs as he crossed the tiled floor, the distant murmur of technicians exchanging hushed theories echoing faintly. Inside the dome, the cold was biting, sharper than the outside frost. Ellis pulled his coat tighter, fingers numb despite the gloves. He moved toward the diagnostic scanners set up along the bus floorboards, their screens glowing with strange thermal images. The latest scans showed clusters of heat signatures deep beneath the insulation, mummified bodies, preserved perfectly, unnaturally. His stomach twisted as he stared at the formation. 23 small figures arranged in a precise circle, each facing inward, arms resting calmly by their sides, as if in silent communion. Ellis's eyes lingered on the image, heart pounding. This was no accident, no chaotic tragedy. This was deliberate, ritualistic. The image played in his mind, superimposed over the bus's faded yellow frame, the scratched names on the seats, the wooden planks nailed from inside. What had these boys been trying to do? And what were they holding back? Ellis. A voice called softly behind him. It was Cal Hensley, the cryptologist, clutching a worn notebook. His face was pale, shadowed beneath the harsh lighting. "I think you need to see this." Cal handed him a page. The ink faded but still legible. The words sprawled across the paper told of a presence called Mr. Smoke, a figure who only appears after dark and feeds on broken promises. The handwriting was inconsistent, small childish letters sprawled beside hurried scrawls, suggesting multiple authors. One line stood out, written in bold, shaky letters. "Dunley let it in. We told him not to speak its name." Ellis swallowed hard. The image of the bus driver, Mr. Dunley, flashed unbidden to his mind. The man's quiet demeanor, his heavy breathing, and that chilling frozen scream on the recovered body. Could Dunley have been the weak link? Had he unknowingly invited something terrible on board? "That can't be right," Ellis murmured, eyes scanning the room as a weight settled on his chest. This isn't just superstition." Cal nodded, eyes darkening with a mixture of fear and fascination. "There's more." The notebooks had coded passages, warnings. "I decoded a few last night, entries about promises kept and broken, about silence and binds. It's like the boys made some sort of pact." Ellis's jaw clenched. A pact to keep this thing contained. As if on cue, the soft hum of the building's ventilation shifted, carrying with it a faint whisper that made the hairs on Ellis's neck stand up. He glanced around sharply, heart hammering. The other technicians looked away, busy with their tasks, but the atmosphere had shifted. It felt as if the bus itself was watching. Security had been tightened around the facility ever since the bodies were found, but rumors had started to spread. Ellis had heard the stories, 2 guards quitting abruptly, citing whispers inside the bus, and an overpowering urge to sleep whenever they approached the dome. At first, he'd dismissed them as nerves, overactive imaginations fueled by the cold and isolation. But now, staring at the circle of mummified bodies and the cryptic warnings in the notebooks, doubt crept in. "Have you noticed anything strange?" Ellis asked Cal quietly, voice barely above a whisper. Cal hesitated, then nodded. "Last night I swear I heard tapping, like someone knocking on the inside of the bus. But no one else was near." Ellis rubbed his temples. The weight of the investigation pressed down on him. His motivation had started simply: uncover what happened to those boys, bring closure to a lost tragedy. But now he realized the stakes were far higher. This was no ordinary case. It was a silent war between something unseen and those who had dared to challenge it. The cold seeped deeper, as if the bus exhaled a frozen breath through the cracks. Ellis looked up at the boarded windows, their wooden planks still firmly nailed from the inside, sealing in whatever secret lay beneath the rusted floor. He swallowed hard, voice steady but edged with a raw urgency. "There's something inside that bus we were never supposed to find." The cold metal plates beneath the bus floorboards gave way with a sharp creak as the excavation team pried them loose, revealing the dark, frozen earth below. Ellis Carr knelt beside the narrow opening, his breath fogging the thin air of the sealed dome. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, casting pale shadows over the gathered investigators. One by one, they reached down into the cramped cavity, their gloved hands pulling up fragile bundles wrapped in decades-old fabric, the faded colors barely visible beneath the grime. Each bundle revealed the skeletal remains of a boy, their arms still linked in a perfect circle, eyes closed as if in sleep, their faces calm, untouched by terror or pain. Ellis swallowed hard, a chill that wasn't just from the cold settling deep in his chest. 23 boys, the entire group from that cursed bus, united even in death. He studied the way their bodies were arranged, noting how the circle was unbroken. Their hands clasped tightly, fingers intertwined like a chain that refused to snap. The scene was eerily peaceful, almost sacred, like a frozen moment captured in time. The contrast was stark and unsettling. There was no sign of panic, no haphazard arrangement that a desperate group might make. Instead, it looked deliberate, as if they had made a choice. Near the rear of the bus, slumped awkwardly against a rusted support beam, lay the driver, Mr. Dunley. His mouth was frozen open mid-scream, eyes wide in silent horror, a stark departure from the quiet repose of the boys. Ellis knelt beside the driver's body, running a gloved hand gently over the dusty collar of Dunley's coat. The difference gnawed at him. The boys had accepted whatever fate had come, but Dunley, something had broken him. The medical examiner's voice came crackling over the radio, tense but clinical. No signs of hypothermia or external trauma on any of the children. Cause of death remains undetermined. Dunley's lungs filled with ash. No evidence of fire or combustion inside the bus. Ellis rubbed his forehead, the weight of that contradiction pressing in. Ash in the lungs without fire? It was a puzzle that teased at the edges of reason. A sharp motion caught Ellis's eye. Each boy had a small strip of cloth wrapped tightly around one wrist, the fabric worn and frayed but intact after all these years. He carefully peeled back one, revealing faint stitching, a single word, painstakingly embroidered in uneven but determined handwriting: promise. Moving along the line of bodies, other words came into focus: truth, stay, protect. Each strip was unique, each word like a vow sealed in thread. Ellis looked up sharply, meeting Roland Tim's restless gaze. The man's eyes were wide, veins visible on his temple, his hands trembling slightly. They made a pact, Roland whispered, voice breaking. They meant to hold something back, to keep it inside. Ellis nodded slowly, heart pounding. A containment. That's the only explanation. His voice was low but edged with awe. Whatever Mr. Smoke was, they tried to trap it here. Roland's face twisted with a mixture of fear and reluctant understanding. He swallowed, swallowing hard. I remember something from that night. A dream. Benny stood at the foot of my bed. He said, "You're safe now. Don't tell anyone." He paused, eyes distant, voice barely audible. I thought it was just grief, but maybe it was a message. Ellis's gaze dropped to the peaceful faces once more. Maybe they didn't die in fear, he murmured. Maybe they sacrificed themselves. The cold air inside the sealed dome felt heavier than ever, as if the bus itself exhaled a slow, deliberate breath. Ellis stood near the entrance, watching as Cal adjusted the beam of his flashlight, the narrow circle of light trembling across the cracked vinyl seats and frost-lined windows. The noise outside, the buzz of news vans, the distant murmurs of protesters, had been replaced by a deep, oppressive silence. For 40 minutes, Ellis waited, pacing with growing unease. Then the door creaked open, and Cal stumbled out, pale and visibly shaken. His face was ashen, lips parted slightly as if still trying to catch a breath. His eyes darted around, haunted, refusing to meet Ellis's gaze. It talked to me, Cal whispered, voice barely above a trembling breath. Not out loud, inside my head. It knew my name. The words hung in the air, chilling and impossible. Ellis's brow furrowed, disbelief fighting with dread. What are you saying, Cal? You heard something? Saw something? He took a cautious step forward, searching for rational explanations to anchor the moment. Cal's hands shook as he pulled a crumpled note from his jacket pocket, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The paper was worn and smudged, written in a shaky child scrawl that made Ellis's skin crawl. If it talks to you, don't answer. Promise. A cold wind seemed to rise inside the dome as Ellis read the words aloud, the faint hum of the bus's aged machinery filling the sudden silence. Who left this? Ellis asked, eyes narrowing. Cal could only shake his head, swallowing hard as if the memory clawed at him. I found it hidden behind the rear heater. It wasn't there before. Or at least I didn't see it. Ellis's mind raced. Was this some cruel prank? Or something far darker? The stories they'd uncovered, the strange symbols, the sealed emergency exit, all suddenly felt alive, watching, waiting. The air pressed down on them, thick with an unseen weight. That night, the facility was quieter than usual. Security tightened but uneasy. Ellis sat alone in his cramped office, the notes staring up at him from his desk like a silent warning. Hours slipped by, and a creeping unease settled deep in his bones. Then came the call. Cal was missing. His car was found miles away, abandoned on a forgotten road. The door stood wide open, the engine still warm, the tape recorder left running on the passenger seat. Ellis's hands trembled as he took the device, pressing play. Static crackled, followed by a faint, eerie humming, an unsettling sound that matched the low tone on the original bus recording. The hum seemed to vibrate in his chest, an invisible force pressing against his ribs. Ellis replayed the tape again and again, the humming burrowing deeper into his mind. It wasn't just sound, it was a message, a presence. Something old, patient, and hungry. He sat back, voice barely a whisper. "We broke the seal," Ellis muttered, eyes fixed on the darkened window. "And now something's listening." Ellis sat stiffly in the narrow visitor's chair, his fingers wrapped tightly around the worn leather armrests. Across from him, James Crick's eyes, clouded with age and years of sorrow, fixed unblinking on the grainy photograph Ellis had just set down on the table between them. The image showed the bus's windows, each one sealed shut from the inside with jagged wooden boards, an eerie, silent testament to something no one wanted to face. James's lips trembled as he whispered, "They kept their word, didn't they?" Ellis leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "James, I need to understand. What kind of promise could have been so strong that those boys would seal themselves inside that bus? What were they trying to keep in, or keep out?" The old man's hands clenched into fists on the table. His voice cracked with a mixture of grief and fragile hope. Davin and Benny, they were different, obsessed with things no one else noticed. Started with a book, not from our school's shelves, bound in black canvas, no author's name. I found it once, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the library. It was open to a page titled Binding Circles. A warning was scrawled beneath, "Once invited, it cannot leave without a trade." James's eyes darted nervously, as if afraid the very walls might be listening. Ellis swallowed hard, the cold weight of dread settling in his chest. A trade? What kind of trade? James exhaled slowly, a dry, haunted sound. They spoke about it like a game at first. In the woods behind the school, they dared each other to break the rules no one else knew. "Invite Mr. Smoke," they said. They whispered about holding hands, about not speaking truths, about not playing games. His voice lowered further, almost to a hush. I thought it was childish fantasy, until I heard Davin talking in his sleep. Ellis's eyes narrowed. What did he say? James's gaze fell to the cracked linoleum floor. "We have to hold hands, Dad," the boy whispered, his voice thin and fearful. "It gets louder when you're alone." The memory trembled in James's chest, tightening like a vice. That night before the trip, Davin hugged me. So tight, it brought tears I hadn't shed in years. He looked back up, his voice raw but resolute. "Now I know." He wasn't saying goodbye. He was saying thank you for keeping me out. If that moment sent chills down your spine and made your heart race, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because some mysteries demand to be uncovered. The black canvas book lay open on the cluttered desk in Ellis's dimly lit office, its worn pages whispering secrets that seemed to shift beneath his eyes. He leaned closer, tracing the faded, almost illegible words with a trembling finger. Despite the cold hum of the fluorescent light overhead, sweat beaded on his forehead. The book was unlike anything Ellis had ever seen, an enigma wrapped in eerie silence. Outside the window, the wind howled against the old state building, rattling the panes as if nature itself wanted to tear away the veil of mystery. Roland Tim stood nearby, his posture stiff but eyes haunted, as he recounted the memories that had long buried themselves beneath years of guilt and regret. "We called it the Quiet Book," he said softly, voice rough with the weight of remembering. His gaze never left the fragile pages. "Because when you read it, everything went quiet. Too quiet. Like the world itself was holding its breath." Ellis nodded, pushing a stray lock of hair from his face. "You said there were dares written in the margins?" His voice was careful, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile spell woven through those lines. Roland swallowed hard. "Yeah, things like, speak no truth for 3 days, or hide in the dark till it finds you." The kids treated it like a game, but he hesitated, fingers curling into a fist. Some pages didn't stay the same. They changed, depending on who held the book. The words settled between them like a thick fog. Ellis thought about the patterns he had been chasing, the whispers of forgotten legends, the way the book seemed alive, hungry for something more than just words. He had reached out to folklore analysts in a desperate bid to find a name for this darkness. Only one had responded, anonymously and with caution. The description of the shadow broker had struck a chilling chord. A malevolent spirit said to collect broken promises from children, offering protection in exchange, but punishing those who failed to keep their word with brutal fury. Ellis felt a shudder crawl up his spine. Was this the force behind the boarded windows, the circle of silent boys, and the dreadful pact they had made? The thought pressed against his chest like a heavy weight, suffocating in its inevitability. That night, as darkness swallowed the sky, the sealed dome protecting the bus seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Ellis watched security footage alongside Roland in a sterile control room filled with blinking monitors and stale coffee cups. The cameras showed flickering lights dancing like ghosts inside the bus, shadows twisting and contorting in impossible ways. Then, without warning, a burst of static overwhelmed the feed, plunging the screens into pitch-black silence. "Did you see that?" Roland whispered, voice barely audible. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the console, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Ellis shook his head slowly. "Nothing like this has happened before. The cameras, they just died." They waited, breath held tight, hearts pounding against the sterile hum of machinery. By morning, when the staff returned to the site under a dull gray sky heavy with low clouds, something had undeniably changed. The bus's interior walls, once blank and cold, were now lined with intricate frost patterns, delicate and haunting. The swirling ice crystals formed words, stark and unmistakable in their chilling clarity. "Alone." Ellis swallowed hard, feeling the room close in around him. He exchanged a glance with Roland, whose face had gone pale. "It's looking for someone," Roland said, voice trembling but steady. He stepped back from the fence that enclosed the dome, his gaze distant and dark. "Someone who knows its name." The cold dome was deathly silent except for the faint hum of Ellis's battery lamp cutting through the thick shadows. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of rust and something metallic, like old blood. Roland's breath came in quick, shallow bursts, visible in the pale beam as it danced along the frost-lined walls of the bus. James Crick stood stiffly beside them, clutching the edges of his thin jacket like a lifeline. His eyes darted nervously, lips pressed tight as if bracing for some unseen blow. Ellis glanced around one last time, then nodded. "Ready." His voice was low, strained with exhaustion but edged with determination. Roland swallowed hard and adjusted his grip on the flashlight. James exhaled, trembling but resolute. They had agreed. This was their last chance before the state sealed the case forever. burying the truth beneath layers of cold bureaucracy. James stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper as he began the chant. We call the quiet. We give our names. We speak no truths. We play no games. The words felt ancient, brittle like dry leaves crackling underfoot. The bus seemed to respond. A deep creak echoed from the emergency exit at the rear, once welded shut, now groaning with the weight of decades. The sound grew louder, swelling into a low, agonizing moan that vibrated through the metal frame. Suddenly, the door burst open with a hiss, releasing a blast of frigid air that bit at their skin, raising goosebumps. Ellis staggered backward, coughing on the cold as the sharp scent of copper filled his nostrils, thick and unsettling. Roland's eyes widened, heart pounding as he shone his light toward the driver's seat. There, draped over the worn fabric, lay a small bundle wrapped tightly in faded cloth. Slowly, Ellis approached and unwrapped it, revealing the black book, the same strange tome whispered about for decades. At first, the pages were blank, smooth and eerily pristine. Then, ink began to seep across the paper like tendrils of smoke, forming words in a trembling hand. Ellis raised his camera with shaking hands, snapping photo after photo. The pages filled quickly, revealing lines of text written in a childlike scrawl, their meaning unfolding like a dark prophecy. Roland's breath hitched as the final page emerged, stark and chilling. One did not choose. He must finish what was started. The room felt heavier, as if the very walls were closing in. Suddenly, James gasped, clutching his nose as crimson droplets began to spill, staining his pale skin. His knees buckled, eyes rolling back until only white remained. "Tell Davin?" James whispered with fading strength, voice raw. "I kept the promise." Roland and Ellis lunged forward, catching the old man before he hit the floor. Together, they dragged him outside the dome's chilling grasp, laying him on the frozen ground. But the damage was done. The silence James carried now weighed more than his failing body. The bus had taken something from him. Not his life, but his silence. Roland lay awake in the darkness of his modest living room, the faint glow of a digital clock casting red numbers across the peeling wallpaper. His heart thudded unevenly as he listened, straining to catch any sound beyond the hum of the heater. Then, exactly at 2:17 a.m., the silence shattered. 3 sharp knocks echoed against the window pane. Roland froze, breath caught in his chest. The tapping was steady, deliberate, as if someone was standing right outside, demanding attention. A voice followed, low and breathless, threading through the cold night air. "You didn't choose." He sat up straight, fingers trembling as he glanced at the window. Outside, the world was blanketed in snow, the skeletal branches of the old oak tree swaying softly in the wind. But no figure stood there, only a swirling mist that drifted eerily against the glass. His throat tightened. "Who's there?" he whispered, voice cracking. No answer, just that same quiet mist curling along the frosted ground. Roland's hands clenched the threadbare blanket wrapped around his shoulders. This had become his nightly torment since James's death. Those knocks, that haunting phrase, "You didn't choose," like a judgment passed down from shadows. He pressed his palm to the cold glass, willing the presence to reveal itself, but the mist remained silent and ghostlike. Meanwhile, miles away, Ellis sat alone in his dim office, eyes fixed on the black book resting on his desk. The pages seemed alive, faintly shimmering under the flickering light of a worn desk lamp. He flipped through the book slowly, heart pounding as the images morphed before him. Crude stick figures joined hand in hand, encircling a space filled with darkness. Names appeared in thick black ink, scratched in an unsteady hand. When he turned to the final page, a new name revealed itself, his own. Below it, the single word "trade" was written with chilling clarity. Ellis's breath hitched. His fingers shook as he reached for his phone, dialing Roland's number without hesitation. The line rang once, twice, then cut off abruptly. Panic rose like a cold wave. "Roland?" He called into the silent receiver, voice barely steady. No response. The knot in his stomach tightened. Hours later, Roland's phone was found at the edge of Weaver's Bend, half buried in snow and cracked across the screen. Investigators reviewed the last recording. The audio was faint but haunting. The soft fall of snowflakes, a distant wind moaning through the trees, and something else. The faintest whisper of footsteps, followed by a shadow shifting against the incline of the hill. Search parties combed the surrounding woods for days, but the only sign of Roland was his boots. They were placed side by side neatly at the edge of the trail, facing uphill toward the mountain's silent summit. The scene was too deliberate to be accidental, and the air carried an unsettling stillness, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Ellis stared at the recovered footage. The image of the shadow burned into his mind. His voice barely rose above a whisper as he closed the file on his laptop. "It's not stuck in the past," he murmured, rubbing his tired eyes. "It's in the promise, the one they broke." Ellis stared at his phone for the third time that morning, the unanswered calls piling up like a stack of unanswered questions. His access to the Langston bus site had been revoked abruptly, leaving him cut off from the only place that held the answers he sought. Worse still, the black book, his most important piece of evidence, had vanished from his office without a trace. The sterile walls of his now empty workspace seemed to close in on him as a cold sweat broke out on his brow. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting. Driven by a desperate need to find the truth, Ellis made his way to Langston Middle School, a building now swallowed by time and neglect. The once bustling halls were silent, broken glass crunching beneath his worn boots with every cautious step. Ivy crawled up the cracked brick walls like slow fingers reaching for a secret. The bitter wind whispered through the shattered windows, carrying with it memories frozen in dust and shadows. Ellis pulled his coat tighter, the cold seeping into his bones, but he didn't care. He had to see it for himself. In the remains of the library wing, faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and the scent of mold and forgotten paper hung heavy in the air. Ellis's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating shelves knocked askew and books strewn like casualties of time. His heart pounded as he noticed a loose panel near the back wall, partially hidden behind a toppled bookshelf. Kneeling, he pried it open with trembling fingers and found a torn page pressed flat against the cold wood. The paper was brittle, edges ragged as if torn in haste. Ink, faded but still legible, revealed a list of names, all crossed out in thick black strokes. Only one name remained untouched: R. Tim. Beneath it, 3 words were scrawled in hurried, jagged handwriting: "Door still open." Ellis's breath caught in his throat. The message was clear, but the meaning was worse than anything he had imagined. "Roland," Ellis whispered, voice barely audible. His mind raced. Roland Tim, the man who had escaped the field trip all those years ago, was the missing piece, the unchosen one. By not boarding that bus, he had left the circle broken, the bond incomplete. The implications hit Ellis like a hammer. It wasn't just a tragedy frozen in time. It was a puzzle waiting for a final piece that had never arrived. And because of that, the bus hadn't decayed. The boys hadn't simply vanished. They had preserved a seal, a promise, that waited patiently for Roland's return. Ellis sank back against the crumbling wall, the cold concrete biting through his jacket. His fingers trembled as he clutched the paper like a lifeline. "So that's why," he murmured, eyes closing as a shudder ran through him. "That's why everything stayed the same. The seal was waiting for him." A sudden noise shattered the silence, a faint creak from above, like the settling groan of an old building disturbed. Ellis's eyes snapped open. He strained to listen, heart hammering as the shadows seemed to close around him. A whisper, soft as a breath, slithered through the air. "You didn't choose." The hairs on his neck prickled. Fear, raw and sharp, settled deep in his chest. He pushed himself to his feet, voice shaky but determined. "I have to document this," he told himself. "Someone has to know." Back at his small apartment, Ellis spread out his notes, piecing together everything he had learned. The name Mr. Smoke haunted his pages. A presence, a deal, a broken promise that had been waiting decades. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, reluctant but resolute. The words formed slowly, then poured out in a steady stream. Mr. Smoke isn't a ghost. He's a deal, a broken one. And now he's collecting. The night was still oppressive. Ellis sat alone, the glow of the screen casting shadows across his weary face. Suddenly, the silence shattered as a faint knock echoed from his window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. His heart leapt, and he stared toward the dark glass, but no figure met his gaze. Just mist swirling like smoke, curling into shapes his mind refused to name. He tried to shake off the unease, focusing on his final entry. Then, as the clock ticked past midnight, the power flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging him into darkness. The next morning, Ellis was gone. His laptop lay open on the desk, microphone still recording. The only sound captured was his own voice, distant, scared, whispering, "He's in the walls, and he remembers." Weeks had passed since Ellis vanished without a trace, and the official records quietly labeled him as a missing person with a note on mental instability attached to his file. The case was fading into obscurity, quietly dismissed by the authorities who saw nothing but a troubled man lost to his own fears. But Orrin Vexley did not share their doubt. He sat alone in the dim light of the state archive room. The yellowing pages and faded photographs spread out before him like pieces of a puzzle begging to be solved. His fingers trembled as he unfolded a photograph he had found tucked inside a mislabeled envelope, a rare remnant that somehow survived the censorship. The black book lay open, its pages revealing a crude drawing. 5 stick figures standing in a circle, their hands joined. 4 of the figures bore red X marks across them, while one remained eerily unmarked. Orrin's breath hitched as he stared at the illustration, an unshakable chill crawling down his spine. "What does this mean?" he whispered to himself, voice cracking in the silence. He glanced around the empty room, feeling suddenly exposed beneath the flickering fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen but deeply unsettling. His pulse quickened, each beat echoing in his ears. That night, Orrin lay awake in his cramped apartment, the pale glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. His mind replayed every detail he had uncovered, the chilling photos, the scattered notes, the fragments of testimony. Yet, nothing prepared him for the dreams that followed. They came unbidden, vivid and relentless. Snowflakes drifting silently in an endless winter night, distant whispering voices just beyond comprehension, and the sharp, rhythmic tapping, 3 knocks that echoed in the empty corridors of his sleep. Each morning, he woke drenched in sweat, the echo of that tapping still ringing in his ears. On the 3rd night, the tension in his chest tightened unbearably. Orrin had been poring over Ellis's final reports, searching for a thread he could pull, a clue that could make sense of the madness. Then, as he reached for a folder on the floor beside his bed, something caught his eye. A single piece of paper, folded neatly, had been slipped under his door. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. In jagged black ink, the message read simply, "The door is still open. Choose or be chosen." Orrin's stomach churned. He swallowed hard, staring at the words as if they were a summons from a dark shadow just beyond reach. "Choose or be chosen," he muttered. The phrase twisted inside his mind, its meaning elusive yet unmistakably ominous. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the creeping dread, but a gnawing thought burrowed deeper. What if the past was not past at all? In the following days, Orrin noticed strange occurrences he couldn't explain. Names he had seen carved into the bus's wooden seats, the names of those lost boys, began to manifest in his own handwriting. At first, he spotted them on stray notepads he used for work, faint and hurried. Then they appeared scrawled on receipts from a nearby cafe, margins of borrowed library books, even on scraps of paper tucked inside jacket pockets. Each time, the handwriting was unmistakably his own, though he had no memory of writing the words. It was as if something was guiding his hand when he wasn't watching. Fear settled into his bones, a slow-burning flame of terror and fascination. He tried to rationalize it, telling himself it was a trick of his mind, a psychological echo triggered by obsessive research. Yet the sensation of being watched never left him. Sometimes, late at night, he would hear soft footsteps outside his apartment door, or the faintest rustling at the window. He would hold his breath and peer into the darkness, but nothing was ever there. Only a cold mist that seemed to seep through the cracks like a living thing. One evening, unable to bear the isolation, Oren called a close friend from his hometown, a fellow archivist named Martin. His voice was tight, strained with exhaustion. "Martin, I don't know what's happening. These names, they're everywhere. It's like something is teaching me, preparing me, calling me." Martin was skeptical, but his tone softened. "Oren, you're under a lot of stress. Take a break, get some rest. Maybe step away from the files for a while." But Oren shook his head.
No.
"This isn't just stress. I'm part of this now. I think it's choosing me, like those boys. And I don't know if I can say no." As days stretched on, the walls of his apartment seemed to close in, shadows lengthening in corners where no light should reach. The whispers came sometimes, soft, urgent, calling his name through the static hum of the city. The tapping followed him everywhere, a haunting reminder of an unseen presence waiting patiently for him to answer the call. Oren realized, with a sinking certainty, that his life was no longer his own. The story was no longer just a story to be archived or forgotten. It had reached out from the past and touched him, pulling him into a dark pact he did not fully understand but could no longer escape. He thought it was a story, the paper had said, but stories don't remember your name. Snow crunched softly under the worn boots of firefighter Aaron Finch as he pushed through the dense thicket near Weaver's Bend. The pale spring sunlight filtered weakly through skeletal branches, casting thin shadows that danced eerily over the fresh, untouched snow. His breath came out in heavy, misty puffs, and the chill bit into his cheeks despite his thick jacket. The radio in his pocket crackled faintly with static, the search party's communication, but Aaron's focus was drawn elsewhere. Something was wrong. A frantic call had come in hours before. A teenage boy, Lucas Hayes, had disappeared during a solo hike just beyond Frostvale Spur. Lucas was well known to Aaron. The boy's father was a close friend, and he'd often joined firefighting drills. Aaron had vowed to bring him back safe. Then Aaron saw it, footprints in the snow. They were fresh, no more than an hour old. But the prints were strange. They led steadily into the thick forest, weaving through gnarled roots and brambles, and then vanished. No trail forward. It was as if Lucas had simply evaporated. Aaron's heart pounded as he scanned the shadowed woods, searching for any sign of the boy. A faint whisper floated on the breeze, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Stay in seat, stay in seat." The words repeated, growing louder. A chorus carried through the trees. Goosebumps rose along Aaron's arms. "Lucas?" he called, voice steady but urgent. Then, through a break in the trees, Aaron spotted him. The boy sat perfectly still on a fallen log, shoulders rigid, eyes glassy and fixed on some distant, unseen point. His lips moved in barely a whisper. Aaron's breath hitched as he crouched beside him, placing a hand on Lucas's cold shoulder. "Son," Aaron said softly, his voice thick with concern. "What are you doing out here all alone?" Lucas turned his head slowly, eyes vacant yet somehow ancient in their stillness. In a voice barely louder than the wind, he answered, "I was invited." His gaze flicked back to the shadowed woods, and then he began reciting names, one after another, with eerie precision. "Benny Langford, Davin Crick,
Roland Tim."
They keep their promise. Aaron's chest tightened as he realized the boy wasn't fully here. Not really. The names, the words, they stirred something deep and old, something whispered in fearful stories his grandfather used to tell. The land around Frostvale Spur had always held secrets. Now those secrets were clawing back. At the edge of the clearing, a small crowd of searchers gathered silently, watching. The tension was palpable. No one dared move closer. Someone murmured, "The area's been declared off-limits." A man with a government badge nodded grimly. Barriers are up. Reports are being suppressed for safety. But even as they spoke, Aaron saw a few figures darting beyond the warning signs, drawn by curiosity or disbelief. Back at the station, in the dim light of a cluttered archive room, Orrin Vexley stared down at his worn journal. Months of sleepless nights and restless thoughts had led here. His hands trembled as he scrawled the last entry, words jagged and raw. The bus was never the trap. It was the offer. They made a promise. They kept it. We didn't. The weight of those words settled heavily on him. Outside, the wind moaned through broken windows, carrying the distant echo of children's laughter. Or was it a warning? Meanwhile, deep beneath the concrete foundation of the private facility, where the bus lay entombed, silence reigned. The cold metal walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing beneath layers of stone. No one dared open it now. No one except the shadows. And every few years, in houses scattered around Langston and beyond, new carvings appear on walls, small marks, initials, cryptic symbols. Children wake suddenly from nightmares, their small hands smeared with ash, the bitter scent lingering long after the dream fades. Parents whisper of restless nights and unexplainable chills. In a forgotten drawer of an old police office, dust gathers over a small audio tape. It has been there for decades, overlooked and untouched. When someone finally plays it, a faint static buzzes through the speakers, and then a whisper, chilling and clear. There is one seat left. The past was frozen in time, but the truth can never be buried forever. If you stand for justice, remembrance, and answers, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of mystery, survival, and the haunting grip of the past preserved by nature's unforgiving hand. By delving into this chilling discovery, the narrative invites reflection on loss, resilience, and the secrets that time can freeze, urging us to confront the unknown with courage and curiosity.